Welcome in to the executive training on accelerating racial equity with DEI. My name is Kemi Joseph, and I'm very honored to be your leader on this journey right now. And we're doing this talk in honor of Black History Month. Now, I've been Black for quite a while, and so as early as I can remember, during Black History Month, 28 days, maybe 29 days if it's a leap year, at some point in the month, somebody will ask me, why is it that Black people get a month? Why do we only celebrate Black History Month? Now, depending on who's asking me, what they're generally saying is, why are we only focusing on one group, one skin color? And depending on the person's background, what they're sometimes trying to get me to do is join them in a competition or what we call the oppression Olympics, where minority groups or oppressed groups would try to decide who has it worse. Now, I love to compete, but I don't like to play that game because nobody loses. It's only been a few days of February, so I haven't been asked that question yet. And I say, yeah, Claire, I imagine it's still coming. But the interesting thing this year, I've been asked a different version of that question. So I'm sitting in the Zoom room, and like this, I'm in Zoom room after Zoom room after Zoom room, and oftentimes I'll meet with clients or prospective clients, and it's awesome. I get to really have a place where people trust me. We can talk one on one, and something that people will ask. It's like a telltale sign they're about to ask me a question that they don't get to ask anywhere else. Like right before we're gonna log off, they're like, "Hey, before you go," that's how I know it's going. Hey, before you go, let me ask you this. So recently, last week, having a call, this gentleman asked, "Hey, before you go, let me ask. I'm all for equal rights. I'm all for empowering people and making sure they can succeed. But I'm struggling to figure out how is it fair that if I am looking at two candidates and they both are qualified, how is it fair to choose a Black candidate or somebody of a different skin color over somebody who's white? Help me understand that." So I'm staring at him just like this, staring at him just like this. And there's so many thoughts going through my mind. And before I tell you how I answer this question, I want to teach you what we do to create an organization to advance equity in an organization. That way you truly understand the answer that I gave him. So, with that being said, let's dive right into this conversation. This conversation, this training, when you ask who is this for, we are hyper focused on helping purpose driven leaders. And the reason that we are helping purpose driven leaders, so if you're trying to figure out, am I a purpose driven leader? Most likely you are if you're here. These people, maybe your title might be that you're a founder, you're an executive, you're a small business owner, you might be a VP of culture or of people, you might be an HR director. The title is less important to us. It's more about that you're a purpose driven leader, somebody who actually is showing up to advance equity in your organization. The reason we focus on leaders is because we're on this mission right now. We're so fired up. We're on this mission to help 5 million leaders advance equity in their organizations by 2030. You might be asking, how do we get this number? So there are 2 million businesses around the world right now. And I imagine that number is fluctuating, but just the last time it was measured, about 200 million businesses in the world. Now, when we're getting into this conversation, we understand that are there are people at all different stages of how they are adopting this conversation around DEI. So for us, that 5 million is focused on innovators only. Because DEI, D&I, so diversity and inclusion, has only been a conversation for about 60 years. Right? So why when we put it in perspective. And then what's interesting is that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has only been around for 20 of those years. This is part of the reason there's so much confusion. I mean, do you know a 20-year-old in your life right now? Do you know how confused they are? They're trying to figure themselves out. So you're talking about a conversation that's only been happening for 20 years. And this is why it can be frustrating when you're trying to communicate with someone and they don't get it yet, because they don't get it yet. So we're in this process of saying we're focused on those who are innovators, who are blazing a trail and saying we want to make sure other people can come along the journey with us. Absolutely. As we focus on those 5 million leaders, that you are a part of that for us. That allows us to continue to innovate. And that way we can allow people to grow with us along the journey without having to force them, understanding that this is how people embrace change and innovation, regardless of what it is. So do me a favor, type the word forward in the chat if you want to go with us forward, to be innovators and moving this conversation forward in a way that allows more and more people in organizations to feel this sense of equity. So today we're talking about advancing racial equity. We're going to be talking about advancing all equity, make sure that we can help these leaders create environments where every one of their employees is safe and can thrive. And for us, this is a bigger mission for us, that we can create a world where every human being lives safely and thrives. Especially knowing how business impacts the world and how most of us spend a lot of our time in the business world or working for someone, we can understand that focusing our attention on business leaders especially is going to help to tip the scale in creating a world where more people can live safely and thrive. With that being said, for today, for the next hour, right, we're going to tackle a small chunk of this. For the next hour, what we're focusing on, these objectives are teaching you how to measure trust in your company culture so you can advance equity without offending people and making things worse. If you get that out alone, fantastic, right? This would be huge. Some of you are like, yeah, I want to stop offending people. Me too. And somebody said to me, again, all these client calls are like, Kimmy, how do you practice, like, how do you not offend people as you go through? I was like, I think I still offend people. I'm just working harder and harder to make sure I'm offending less and less people and actually building the trust that allows us to rebound. So just that's a side note, but I just want you to know that we're actively practicing everything that we're teaching you as well. And then we want to help you see how you can make the most out of DEI so your team can create the right strategies for the right solutions at the right time. And finally, want to help you engage more of your employees or more of your team in DEI as a positive experience and empower them with the high impact, low burden skills they need to reach your goals. And all of these are super important because most of us, if we're honest, would probably run away from this conversation, right? Like there's been many times last year, I'm like, man, I don't want to do this. It's so hard. This is so intense. And I know for myself I have never solved the problem by avoiding it. And so, yes, I do want to run away. And I know others who want to run away too. We get a chance to talk with amazing experts and other DEI champions. And some of us commiserate of like, dang, this is so hard. So I can imagine for those who are just joining the conversation, how difficult it is as well. And for those who are seeking to be innovators and champions in the organization, we're here to support that work. And we're here to turn the things that would cause us to run away, the things that we know would push us away, which are our fears, to turn that, instead of it being a reason to run away, that we can turn our fears into something we can use for our advantage. So for us, fears, we translate that into fuel extraordinary actions, relationships, and systems. That way we run towards the issue and say, let's get it done. Let's make sure that we can use this challenge, this difficulty to move us forward in the world. And for those of you who came to our last training earlier this month, we did part 1 of this. Now, when we say part 1, some people will say, wait a minute, do I need to did I need to watch the prequel? Say, no, this is fine. You can still track along with us because we'll also send you the recording to part 1 of this. And the part 1 focus on the fuel, extraordinary, and the actions. For part 2 right now, we will be focusing on the relationships and systems. And we're still going to do it in a holistic way. So even if you're just coming in and meeting us for the first time, hello, you'll be fine. So focus in with us. And again, we'll send you the recording for the other part anyhow, right? And so with that being said, in this portion, we're going to be focusing on how you can accelerate racial equity using DEI, using diversity, equity, inclusion. And we'll be focusing on our cultural equity framework. And it starts with how do you assess your organization? And then how do you strategize to make sure your assessments lead you to the right strategy? And then use that strategy to train your team members, including yourself, and to take the steps that you need to move forward and then also celebrate that progress. So this is what we'll be focusing on. And I don't know about you, but the world is going faster and faster. So we call it an accelerator because we know we have to really accelerate this whole conversation. And so what we're going to be doing is over the next about 40 minutes, we're going to go over these 4 steps and to make sure that you walk out of here not only knowing the framework, but also having some tools that you can utilize in your organization, right? So if you are into that, type in the chat, I'm in. If you're like, great, we're going to get some inspiration, we're going to get some focus, and we're also going to leave with some strategies, type I'm in. All right, fantastic. Know that we're rolling with the right people. Now, as we dive into this first piece, this is going to be the longest section. So it's probably be about 20 minutes alone just on this section, just a heads up, because this is going to put our focus in the right direction though. So for one, we always start with assessments because we say that you have to assess instead of make a mess. If you don't assess, you will literally make a mess. I see you laughing there, Pam. Yeah, we know people can walk in and make things worse. And it's never been easier to make things worse. So I'm telling you, you have to start with assessing. Now, when we're talking about something like equity, part of that, what I like to assess is, are we speaking the same language, right? A lot of people define these things differently. So we start by even asking people, how do they define DEI? And again, knowing that equity, the E is relatively new for a lot of people, I'd like to offer you this definition right now. That equity is fairly and systematically giving all people what they need to live safely and thrive. And that means that each person needs something different and that we are in this process of giving them what they need as an individual. So it's very interesting that equity is a diversified version of inclusion, right? We're not just giving everybody the same resources. It's like you all have different organizations. For us to give you exactly the same solutions or exactly the same tools wouldn't make sense for you to grow and succeed in your business. So just like you need as a business owner, business leader, team leader, different tools to succeed, that's what equity is making sure that each of you and everybody in your care gets the tools that they need to succeed. And what's interesting here, when we start to add race into this conversation, we have to consider that racial equity is that same fairness, that same systematic fairness in honor of their race, their color, or creed. It used to say regardless, but I think that idea of saying we want to empower you regardless of your skin color is kind of like saying we don't see skin color. It's like, no, let's be real, right? You can, if you're not like literally colorblind, you can see that I'm a young chocolate brown man, right? And I'm grateful for my skin color. And I also want to make sure that it doesn't become a barrier for me or that anybody else's skin color doesn't become a barrier for them. So we're having this conversation here that racial equity is helping people and giving them what they need to thrive in honor of their race, color, or creed. And this is happening at work, at home, and in the community. Now, even as we start to look at definitions and break this down, when we start to seek images of what does racial equity actually look like in the world. And many of y'all might have seen the images of the boxes and people, standing up on these boxes and saying, this is what this person needs. But when we really get down to what does racial equity actually look like, it is very interesting that a Google search might lead this. Oh, there's an error, can't find the actual image we're looking for, especially when we think about the amount of diversity in the world and trying to cover it. Please understand that racial equity is not just for Black skin, right? Or Black or brown skin. Racial equity, if we're really breaking this down, like we are a human race, right? racial equity, the idea of race is a social construct, which we can talk about in another time, but that was to like separate people by skin color. So if we're looking at this conversation, we're saying that it's really hard to say what does racial equity actually look like, especially if we are only focused on skin color as a barrier. So for us, we want to separate this conversation. I'm going to ask you to think about equity differently. Now, if you can understand what I'm about to show you in this next slide, you're, at least for us, when we broke this down, not only did it help to reduce our level of anxiety, but also focus our attention on what we can do, especially as business owners and business leaders. So I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to show you right now. Instead of looking at the barriers to equity, like skin color may be a barrier, our focus is what are the equity pathways that every human being needs to thrive. For example, health and mental health, family equity, social or relational equity, spiritual or religious equity, housing equity, environmental equity, educational equity, economic equity, career equity, legal equity, and governmental or governance equity. These are what we're calling equity pathways. So it's saying that regardless of my skin color, if I have all of these things, I will feel empowered. This is the part that blew our mind, because if you're trying to empower a Black person, talk to me as one Black person. I will need a different combination of these things based on where I'm currently at in my space. We are trying to offer one solution for all Black people, all brown people, all Latinos, all white people. That's how DEI works. So it's important that as we're breaking this down, in each of these pathways, we need to have awareness, what's even possible, what's available to us in this pathway, have access to that, have access to those resources, access to information, have opportunity to utilize those things to move our lives forward, have the safety that says, I can have this and I'm not going to be under threat by having it. Also, being able to have a sense of belonging. So we're talking about, if we're just focusing on the career path, awareness of what opportunities are even available in your organization, access to those opportunities, the safety to actually be in your organization and find a sense of belonging or inclusion, the resources to do my job, the development that you can help to train me as an individual to be a stronger individual in your organization to actually, again, thrive. And then advancement, that I have ability to grow in leadership possibilities, as well as to contribute to the organization. And then autonomy, having that sense of freedom, right? Having a sense where you trust, there's actual trust in there that I can operate in a way that allows us both to have that autonomy. And then legacy is leaving a deep sense of contribution, that even when I'm gone, I've made the impact. And when I go into retirement, that I'm leaving things better off than they were when I was there, but also a legacy that allows us to continue to evolve. Now, there are several of these equity pathways, and the part that we want to help you is to focus your attention. If you're in the business world as a business leader, you are not necessarily responsible for everyone's mental health and their family and all these things, but you are definitely responsible for career equity, because you are offering people a career path, right? So we're just going to focus our attention here. And the beauty is, as you make your organization fair, so people can become aware of your opportunities all the way up to leaving a legacy in your organization, as you create that pathway, you actually help people grow the pathways in the rest of their lives. This is the beautiful part. You don't necessarily have to work on all of the issues at the same time. If you focus on providing a clear pathway to career development in your organization and making that equitable, you will be helping people improve several areas of their life at once. The opposite is also true, though. If you stunt growth in your organization, you're also stunting growth in other areas of people's lives. So when we focus on career equity, we understand that equity right here, equity right where you are, is a pathway to equity everywhere. We want to focus your attention on career equity. That way you're not necessarily have to worry about all the social issues, the legal issues, governmental issues. Make sure that your organization in this desert of inequity, that your organization can be an oasis for people. That's what you're actually legally compliant to do anyhow. Now we're going to help you make that process more focused and even enjoyable for you. So it's not just about checking boxes, it's about understanding how you are empowering people long term. So we're going to focus on this version. This is what we're going to be doing. Now, as we're going into career equity, what's interesting is we see these things that would be ideal to have. Again, awareness, access, opportunity, safety, belonging, resources, development, advancement, autonomy, and legacy. The reason these things are not happening is because there's often gaps. There are often diversity, equity, inclusion gaps that are blocking people from even having this kind of equity in your organization. For example, you might have gaps in your recruiting practices. You may have gaps in your hiring practices, so people can't even get those opportunities. If you're having a lack of safety, you're having a gap in how you're protecting your team. Or you might have inclusion gaps, which is preventing people from belonging. Having resource gaps, which we would say is a funding gap. Are you actually funding the? Are you fund? Do you have the resources to and the bandwidth, the time, the talent, and the treasures to be able to support your people? And then if you're having development gaps and you're not training your talent, then it's a struggle with your training. You're having DEI gaps in your training process. And then obviously if you're not advancing, you're having gaps in how you advance and elevate people. And if you cannot get to a place of autonomy or legacy, if you're blocking people from that, you're also blocking how your organization operates. I don't know about you, but I don't want people always having to ask me for the answers. I want to be able to empower them to do what they need to do in my organization because that actually gives me a pathway to equity in our own organization. So this is why we assess. We want to find the gaps and help you to close those gaps. If you need to see it in a different way, this is how we like to process it. And think about 8 essential areas that are impacting your ability to thrive as an organization, impacting your employee retention, your talent retention, even your engagement, as well as your ability to recruit and hire. So these are the DEI gaps that we see organizations have, and we help them find it. We actually help you find it. To tell you that they exist and to not help you would be very sad. We help you to find those through doing assessment. And the beautiful thing is that we also help you to close those gaps. That's the goal. If you just find a gap and then ignore it, that doesn't help. We want to help you to close those gaps and make sure you're operating at the highest level possible for each of these areas. From there, that's how you actually create that crisis proof culture that we were talking about on the Eventbrite page. That your team is operating at such a high level that, yeah, the world is chaotic, but you have the ability to sustain a level of trust, a level of collaboration and innovation that says we inside of our organization determine how we will operate, not the world. We decide that. So that's what we're here to talk about, is creating that crisis-proof culture. Again, it starts with assessing to figure out where you are. So I'm going to put a series of questions on here. You're welcome to capture or screen capture the questions once the slide is full. For example, one of the first questions we're helping organizations act is how fair is our organization for Black people, for Latinos, for folks with disabilities, for folks with alter abilities, for folks who are English as a second language, for white people, right? The idea is the organization fair? But let's start to find out. Then we can figure out, what can I measure to figure that out, right? That is a big question. So again, it might be looking at your recruitment. It might be looking at your current diversity stats. It might be looking at your hiring practices. We basically be looking at those 8 essentials and starting to pinpoint what can we actually measure to find out how fair our organization is. And notice the word says how fair, because you don't have to be bad to get better. If your organization is fair for one group, great, let's keep that going and then continue to make it fair for other groups. And then how can I act? How will acting on the information, how will I act on the information I gather? When you're trying to put together an assessment, some people get overwhelmed, they ask 1,000 questions. We want to get very focused on the questions we ask in order to make sure that we have information that we can act on, but it's also helpful to know how we're going to act on that information, which is a part of the reason we focus on leadership. because when leaders get the information, they can decide more on how they act compared to if, sometimes we work with DEI committees. And I'll say this, like I really respect DEI committees, but we help people go from being a DEI club, which is a club that doesn't have any power, right? Just a group of people who are meeting and maybe we're doing like book readings or things like that. That's in my opinion, that's a club. A DEI committee is when you start to have power to enact change in your organization. So if you're in a DEI club, we want to help you actually make a DEI committee so you have the power to do the things that you're being asked to do. So when we think about how do we act on the information, it allows us to figure out which information we're going to gather. So when we gather the information that we're actually able to make an impact on. There's so many committees and so many leaders who are focusing on how they can recruit a broader sense of people. And we're saying, how much influence do you have on the recruiting if you're not a hiring manager or a hiring person, but you have a complete influence on your current team right now? So let's focus on measuring that safety and trust and let that ripple out to then when you're recruiting people, they know they're coming into a safe organization. So we're trying to help you piece apart what actually can work, where you can have influence in order to make sure your assessments are on point. So I'm not going to dive that deep into every single question, but I want you to know that these are some of the questions we ask our clients as we're helping to build out their assessments. So how will taking action on this information help my team? How do I ensure people's privacy to make sure that they actually will submit the information and share with me what I need to know to help them? How can my assessments questions be more inclusive? This one I have to share a little bit. Demographic information is always interesting, especially when you're the other, right? So they might say, okay, how do you identify? And it's like, okay, you're white, Black, Latino, so on. It's like, if you're that other box, you know how like frustrating that is when you're the other. So instead, we'll say in terms of gender, for example, how do you identify? Let people type it in. In terms of ethnicity, how do you identify? Let people type it in. It takes a little longer, but it's way more inclusive than having us just be able to check off a box, especially when we don't fit into that box. Boom, I already disengaged. I don't want to participate as more. We want to help you to break this down to make sure that even you, as you're looking at how can your assessment questions be more inclusive, and then where does the assessment fit into our strategic plan? If your company is super busy and you're literally not going to even do anything with the information, I would say that it's better that you plan ahead and say, we're going to run this assessment and we're going to put it into our quarterly goals to make sure that when we get the assessment information, we can actually take action. And then how do I share and debrief the data? Now, the debrief is just as important as sharing the data. We want to actually have people able to interpret it and talk about it as a team. Because if you just share data without debriefing it, you will run into one of the biggest barriers is mistrust. You will run into mistrust and people will interpret the data in so many different ways. And we'll tell you right now, as we're talking about trust and talking about measuring trust, go ahead and grab a screenshot of this before I move on. For those of you who want it, if again, we'll send you the video afterwards, but I know people are wanting to take screenshots. This is it. I'll just do a cool little pose so you can grab it. Great, fantastic. Okay, awesome. So now we keep rolling. So with this being said, what we're going to tell you that in terms of sharing assessment data and even gathering data, people won't share things or won't talk about it when you have mistrust, right? We're going to tell you that mistrust is the most expensive. It's even there twice, the most expensive problem a company can have, right? We want you to know we double down the most to make sure that you know how dang expensive this is. And it's not just mistrust with your employees. We know that people only do business with those they like, know, and trust. So this is trust with your investors, your customers, your team members, your vendors. If you run a nonprofit space, you're talking about, instead of investors, you're talking about your donors, right? Or your board. But trust is so easy to break right now and to misinterpret. And if we're not debriefing the data that we're gathering, people are going to make their own interpretations. And then we end up losing that trust because the gap gets bigger and bigger. However, when you're practicing diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI is what increases, or your lack of DEI diminishes your trust. And DEI is a solution framework that says, how do we make things better for the people in our organization, which really shows up in our behaviors. So it's our words and our actions. Are we actually following up with the things that we say we're going to do, which is what actually creates our company culture. So when we're talking about using a crisis proof or creating a crisis proof organization, saying that crisis-proof organization is built on the behaviors which are led and guided by diversity, equity, inclusion that are really strengthening the trust in our organization. Understanding this equation alone will save you a lot of time and frustration. And for those of you who are talking about how do I assess it, how do I pinpoint it, a lot of folks will do this through employee engagement and measuring employee engagement or employee retention. So we would say that your employee engagement is going to be either greater than, so that your employee engagement will be equal to or less than the trust in your organization. Your employee engagement will never be higher than the level of trust in your organization. It's either going to be equal to or less than the trust in your organization. And if you're like, okay, this all sounds great, but I need to know let me talk about the bottom line. Okay, well, this is not just us talking, right? We also follow Gallup, and Gallup says worldwide, 85% of employees are disengaged. And oftentimes disengaged is a lack of trust. Just tell you straight up, lack of trust, lack of safety. And any of you who ever been disengaged in your job, you can back it up. It's like, I don't trust that company. I don't know that company. They don't care about me. Why should I give them my full focus? So 85% of employees worldwide are disengaged. And what's interesting is that when an employee is disengaged, instead of getting 100% of their attention or time, the things that you're paying for, Gallup is saying that you lose 34%. So their productivity is 34% lower than it should be. And let's just use some statistics from the US. So here, looking at the average salary of $60,000, that means if you're losing 34%, that means you're losing $20,000. And I use the burning fire effect for that. I don't like to throw away money. And so it's interesting, if you have a company of about 100 people, or we work with companies of all different sizes, is it saying that 85 of those people will be disengaged? That's crazy. Can you think about even trying to succeed with your whole team not fully participating? And it's not their fault. I'm not trying to blame it on them. It's saying that there's a structural issue in your organization. And we're here to help you fix it for you, for as a leader, and for them. And so what's important here is to know that, yeah, you don't get that 100%. So if we look at 85 people times 2,000 for $20,000, just rounding these numbers, I mean, when I look at millions of dollars being wasted in an organization on a year, that kind of blows my mind. It seems like too high of a number to wrap my head around. Sometimes I think about, okay, maybe I can think about it as a month, but what if it's like about $5,000 a day? So when your team is complaining about something and they're frustrated about something, or they're spending an hour trying to write an email that they know they're going to send to the person's still going to take it the wrong way, all of that just throwing money out the door. Instead, we can resolve those issues. And some people, I've had this over and over, people say, I don't think that's happening in our organization. So fine, maybe you're the anomaly, right? Maybe that's true. I would say, what's the cost of not knowing? This goes back to assess before you make a mess. To assume that you are just perfect, good luck on that one. I'll just say that right now. Right, I support you believing in yourself. I just want to make sure you also know what's happening in your organization. So now we're talking about this conversation of what do we actually assess? How do we measure trust? Again, it shows up in employee engagement. So when you're doing an employee engagement survey, some of the things that you might want to pinpoint are questions like this: that my voice is heard and included in decisions that directly impact me. So it doesn't have to be in every decision, but the ones that directly impact me should have my voice in it, right? And then our organization provides adequate information about important issues and/or changes. Our organization effectively takes action to improve/resolve issues based on the feedback I and other employees provide. My management team is transparent. I trust my coworkers/my team. Now, all of these you can do on a Likert scale. So people can just submit this information anonymously, scale of 1 to 10, and you'll get a sense of what's going on in your organization. And we always ask a question like this: what positive or negative factors are contributing to my scores? That way, if people have a high level of trust, they can say what's going well. Fantastic. Let's amplify that. If there's a low level of trust or low level to any of these answers, let's talk about what they believe is negatively impacting that score. So that way, we literally start to figure out where the gaps are and what's causing those gaps. So I want to show you what this would look like. Well, this looked like in one of our teams we worked with recently. So they had We asked this question, my voice is heard and included in conversations that directly impact me. And so we were working with them last quarter, right, Q4 of 2020. And they're a small team, but you can see the spread here, right? There's 11 people who responded here. And we're looking at the spread that some people are 1, some people are 10. And we're back to debriefing. We're always looking at what is causing that spread or what is causing that gap. So for them, when we think about that, those 8 essential business areas, they were struggling with including and protecting their team. So 6.2 in those areas. So in working with them just for one quarter, we were able to get that to an 8.8. So notice we're not even aiming for perfection. We're not saying, hey, everybody has to be at a 10, but we move that conversation further along. And when your team sees movement, that they're way more motivated to continue and to participate at a higher level. So what's interesting here is imagine if it was a team of 100 people, back to that example from Gallup, right? If there was a team of 100 people and you had about 40 of your people saying that their voices were not heard or included in conversations that directly impact them, do you think they would actually participate at a high level in your organization? I don't think so. And the SD is strongly disagree, and the SA is strongly agree. So if you didn't take a screenshot of this, I encourage you to take a screenshot now. As you're thinking about your assessments, we encourage you to be asking the broader question, how fair is our organization for, and then fill in the blank. Ideally, you keep on improving that until you can say it's fair for everybody. What can we measure to find out? How will we act on the information we gather? How will taking action on this information help our team? And so on, protecting people's privacy, making sure it's inclusive, fitting into strategic goals, and then how do you share and debrief the data? Now, I told you that was like 20 minutes, like on the dot. Holy moly. That's the biggest section. The rest of them are going to be a little shorter. But if you can assess, that gives you the ability to then start accurately strategizing, which is the next portion. So what we're going to do is spend a few minutes on strategizing. So after you assess, right, you want to then strategize to be able to use the information. Otherwise, if you don't use the information, you actually make the problem worse. So when you're talking about strategizing, the reason we even want to focus on that is because your culture, your company culture is happening by default or by design. By default, it's going to be one of mistrust. I'll tell you that right now. One of mistrust, one of exclusion, one of frustration, one of disengagement. By design, you actually get to get a culture of trust, a crisis-proof culture even. And what's interesting is just like you design your products and you design your promotional plans and your profit plans, we want you to design your culture. And if you're really wanting to advance racial equity in your organization and you're dealing with people who are literally going to ask you questions like I've been asked of, why are we only focusing on Black people right now? If that question is coming up even in your own mind, one of the things I need you to understand is when we're talking about equity in your organization, race or skin color is just one piece of this pie. We actually have to create a culture where we are moving equity further along in our organization. So we're calling this cultural equity. We have a culture of equity in our organization that no matter who you are, in honor of who you are, you can thrive here. As long as you're going to be doing a job, right? We're like, it's weird that we have to say that. Again, you hired these people, right? Just people are not just rolling into your organization, right? We're hiring folks. We're bringing people in to our organization. If we're going to do that, we got to help them have a path to developing themselves and to developing our organization. So it's important that we're taking a systematic effort to advance people of all diversities in your organization. And when we're talking about being strategic in this, once you identify a gap, it's important that you use that assessment data as soon as possible. One of the charts we've been sharing with people recently is from Workify, and he's talking about how there is a half-life on data. That if you don't use the data, the longer it takes you to use the data, the less valuable and effective it is. And so some companies are waiting maybe 6 months, 9 months to actually use data. And it blows us away. Our goal is to get folks to use data within 90 days, ideally within 30 days, because then you can see how you actually stay within the 80% to 100% range. And so it's important that as we are strategizing for us, going back to this conversation about design, our strategy sessions are called DEI by design. We literally want to make sure that you know how to do this, and it's an active process. It's not just a hope for the best, a hope it's going to work out. We have not seen that approach work out, so we have to do this by design to structure we structure our sessions in a way that will help you to answer these kind of questions, right? How do we use assessment data to inform our planning, right? If you're not even asking that question, I'm just trying to just take that one question and go. That's going to be huge to make sure that you use that. And then why do we need to make the change now? This is also helping us to map out when the change is going to happen in your organization, but we have to be able to even communicate that to other people. There are people who are resistant to DEI. Like we said, a lot of you, if you're even talking about DEI, you're in the innovation pathway. It's important that you know that that's only like 2.5% of us. There's so many more people who are resistant. So being able to communicate that to them and strategizing around that so they can see the ROI as well. And then what are the top 3 ways to make the next steps actionable? We don't leave you with a 20,000 step plan. It's like, no, let's focus on the top 2 to 3 things even, depending on the size of your organization. And this next portion, which is what is our organizational rate of change, right? Or the organizational change rate, OCR. So it's basically how quickly does our organization change in general. Let's make sure we plan ahead and move things in a systematic way. So based on that, based on your OCR, what is a realistic implementation timeline? And that way you can communicate to people that you are working on things. It's flowing in the way our organization normally flows, which can be a pro and a con depending on how your organization flows, but we will help you with that as well. And what's interesting is what might prevent the change from happening. Let's go ahead and plan. Let's plan ahead for the difficulties, man. The thing that blows my mind is people are so confident and competent in other areas of their lives. But as soon as we start talking about DEI, it's like, I don't know what's going to happen. How do we do this? What if this happens? What happened to that strong, powerful person who was just a moment ago leading our organization? Let's make sure that we can bring those same tools, confidence, and structure to the success of our culture, to the success of the people in our organization. And then how do we handle setbacks? There will absolutely be setbacks. Let's talk about this. Let's prep ahead. And then this piece here, how can we make our strategy and our goals equitable? How do we make our strategy fair? How do we make sure that the goals we're setting are supportive of everybody in our organization? So these are the big questions that we ask when we help people to do a DEI by design strategy session. Screenshot opportunity, go for it. Before we close out this section. I see y'all, I can see you, right? People are like taking screenshots, great. And as we close out this portion on strategy, right, notice how all of these things are actions, right? The word action doesn't necessarily show up in this diagram, but each one of these is action, and we're offering you a complete action. If you just do one of them by themselves, it's an incomplete action that's going to give you incomplete results. So when we're talking about this portion on train, so we have the data, we have strategy. Now we have to train our team to actually be able to use the strategy. Now, the things that we're talking about, what might hold us back, it's microaggressions, it's resistance, it's this frustration. However, our goal is to switch them into microprogressions, where we're taking regular action on a day-to-day in order to make sure that we can move these forward. So we offer microprogression action classes. We used to call them master classes, but we're like, how do you master something in a few hours? That doesn't make sense. Action class says we're going to be focusing on the actions we need to take to actually make the strategy successful, to make our culture successful. So we focus on low burden, but high impact actions that we can take, high leverage actions that we can take. Otherwise, if you have high burden, low impact, which is kind of what we're doing now, which is things like, hey, go and educate yourself. Okay. I want to make sure that you have low burden, high impact strategies and actions that you can take. And so when we look at some of the action class that we offer, for example, on replacing your bias, on interrupting and redirecting discrimination, right? On having unbiased interviewing and recruiting skills. That way you can actually go and use these things. Trauma-informed support, being able to actually infuse diversity, equity, inclusion into your town hall. So when you have them, they're engaging instead of boring and frustrating. How do you de-escalate defensiveness? How do you actually increase team resilience? What are the actions that help us to increase team resilience and set those equitable goals? Now notice in the action classes, we're not talking about policy. We're talking about practices here to make sure people can be a part of this conversation. Policies are for your organization. Practices are for people to move these things forward. So when we are building out a training, we're going to teach you this philosophy here, is whenever we have a strategy, we're always asking what skills or competencies are required to act on that strategy. It doesn't matter if you give a person a policy or a strategy, do they actually have the skills to do it? If not, let's build a training for that, right? How do you assess your team's skill level? One thing that's happening right now is we're kind of teaching to the middle all the time. There's people who are in the beginning, there's people who are more intermediate, and there's people who are advanced. We have to find that out and be able to support people at where they are to be able to move them forward. So how do we assess that? Back to the assessment, right? See how it's all linked together. Yeah. How do we make the session accessible? So whether everybody can attend, are we providing recordings? Are we even giving people the time off to be a part of these trainings that we're offering internally already? How do we accommodate diverse learning styles and needs? If you've ever been bored out of your mind on the Zoom call, it's probably not your learning style, right? So how do we accommodate different learning styles to make sure people learn the things we're trying to teach them? What a crazy question. And what is our post-training support system for skill progression, right? So if we're teaching people, for example, implicit bias, how are we supporting that system? And that's going to kind of tee us into the next portion, but how are we building this out to where make sure that folks actually have a pathway for practicing the skill that we just taught them and using the skill to support our business? Now, screenshot opportunity. You see that we're rolling. I told you after that first section, the other ones are going to go much quicker. So when we are now transitioning from train into celebrate, and we include celebrate intentionally in our model because we understand that when it comes to human beings, what you celebrate, you will emanate, right? The things that we actually celebrate, the things we call our friends about, the things that we show up and do in our work, this is the things that we actually care about. And if we're saying you have to do the work of DEI, but then there's never a celebration, man, I don't know about you, but that would be very disheartening. So if you're asking your team to go along the journey, we're going to ask you to make sure you celebrate with them. And celebrating progress is what keeps progress going and continues to build momentum. And your celebrations don't have to be like a dance party on Zoom, right? It's not what we're asking, right? Was actually supportive. I'm going to show you, this is going to be a little bit of a conversation plus a little bit of strategy. We call it the PSC method. And we're asking when we're rolling out a training, when we're rolling out new tactics and new strategy, the PSC stands for push, support, celebrate. So if we're already going to push our team, what kind of support do they need, and how do they actually want to celebrate it? And so this is part of what we might do in a strategy session with you all, and then be able to talk about what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and even on a quarterly basis? You can add annually to this as well. We know most of us, if you survive 2020, you know annually is like a myth now. It's like, what is there a year that's coming? So just this feels attainable for most people, right? So what are we doing to make these things possible and allow us to actually celebrate in a way that's authentic to our team? We're not going to tell you exactly how to do it. We want to help you discover that as a team so you can figure out what actually makes the most sense for you all, and that's the most enjoyable. So again, the DEI can actually be an enjoyable process for you as a leader and the rest of your team. So with the celebrate, some of the questions we'll ask you to consider, I'll just put them on the screen here, and that way you can screen capture as I'm reading them through. So notice the questions are going from how can we measure, again, assess, how do we measure, communicate, and appreciate progress? My apologies. How do we measure, communicate, and appreciate progress? How do we leverage progress to deepen our why for DEI? What celebrations will help maintain momentum? How do people want to be honored for their contributions? That's one of my favorite interview questions as well. Like, how do you want to be honored for a job well done? Most people don't know how to answer that, but most people are not being asked that question. what does it look like to support each other moving forward? And then what does it look like to hold each other accountable? Notice that support comes before the accountable part. Some people are trying to rush in here and hold people accountable, but they never provided any support. Provide support and accountability. So that way, if you ever have to hold me accountable for something, I know that you actually are there to support me. But we're doing in reverse and it doesn't make sense. So I'm telling you, support your team and actually enjoying this process by just fine tuning how we go about doing it. Now, that was a lot in one shot as we show you our framework to help you assess, strategize, train, and celebrate. Right? I see Brian celebrating with me too, right? And that whole time we talked about if you follow along from start to finish, you got there, how you can measure trust. We talk about doing that through assessments, really targeting employee engagement as a pathway to understand how people trust your organization. Then we also talked about make the most of your DEI initiatives. So this is about strategizing so you can actually have the right strategies for the right solutions at the right time, which is putting it into your organization's already your other strategic plans and then being able to provide the skills so people can actually succeed at DEI and then celebrating that progress. Now, the number one question that we get after something like this is, Kemi, right? People say, Kemi, can you help us do this? It's like, absolutely. Most people are overwhelmed. We help organization leaders just like you every single day. It's part of the reason we've been doing these free trainings to make sure you understand the resources. And for those of you who want our support in doing this, I want to tell you about our Cultural Equity Accelerator. So you've been seeing the framework. Now we're telling you how we actually show up and do it in organizations. So we call this a cultural equity accelerator because this is a process to make the things move faster. And again, at a pace that is strategically aligned with your organization. So we're doing the DEI executive coaching to make sure that you get the support and guidance that you need to answer some of the hardest questions people are asking every single day. That we do organizational assessments, assess before you make a mess. That we're doing these DEI by design strategy sessions to make sure that you have this is a strategic approach that everybody in your organization can understand and get behind. And then we're doing these micro progression action classes. So you are making progress every day. And we offer these four elements in three different ways. One is a done for you, where we come in and we do it for your organization. We kind of become an extension of your team. One is a done with you, where we essentially coach your executive team or maybe even your DEI committee to actually implement this on your own. And then there's a do it yourself, where we coach you as the individual leader on how to run this through with your organization. And so what I'll tell you here is that with these three levels, we've tiered out the pricing to make it as accessible as possible. So some of y'all are thinking about, okay, I really want this. I will tell you that some of the starting prices range from $10,000 down to $1,000 a month. So I want you to stick around to really pay attention to what makes the most sense for you and your team, right? And when we jump into the highest level, this is the done for you version, right? This is looking at a year-long conversation, right? And these blocks can change, but I want you to understand just how these are rolled out. So every month providing executive coaching, and then also providing organizational assessments. So notice we have a deeper dive in the beginning and then provide you a post assessments that lead into the executive summaries that let you know that you're on track with exactly what your goals are and your ROI is, right? And then provide you with strategy sessions that will help your key team members. It says mission critical team members, right? So we're not needing all your team to be on these sessions, but making sure that your managers, your leaders, the people who are driving change understand how to drive that change by design. And then providing action classes. These are the skill trainings for your key team members, with recordings being available for those who couldn't attend. That way you can still be running your business while you work on improving your business, right? And this is the done for you version. So this is what we're telling you for $10,000 a month. This is generally for the bigger organizations who are wanting to roll out multiple programs and have an initiative that really is structured across all 8 of those essential business areas. Now, some of y'all are in smaller organizations. Great. There's a smaller package just for you. So this will focus on the DEI executive coaching and the organizational assessment. So make sure that you are getting coaching throughout the year to make sure that you can, again, answer the most difficult questions that you're facing, as well as to use assessments to drive change in your organization. Now, in this version, the strategy sessions and the action classes are add-ons. So if you'd like to add them on, you can easily do so. But just focusing on the executive coaching and the organizational assessment, this is $5,000 a month, right? And I know some of y'all are like, Kemi, all right, I'm a company of two or three. Okay, great. So we're focusing for you all on this. This is a really exciting for me because this is the most accessible option that we have, where we focus on DEI executive group coaching, where we support you in coming in to be part of a cohort model where you're working with other business leaders, similar to what we're doing right now, where you get a chance to be around other powerhouses and champions who are doing this work in their organizations. And so, although we don't do the assessments for you, we provide you with the questions and the expert guidance to go in and do it in your organization. And as we said before, the add-ons are available for you as well. So if there's a time where you want to have us come in and train your team or help strategize, we can absolutely support you in doing that. And along the way, we are teaching you how to do this in your organization, how to tackle things like implicit bias, all the way to recruiting and hiring, to be compliant, to also understand how you train your staff internally and become an advancer in your organization and in your industry. So this is the do-it-yourself version. We show you how to do it, and then we send you off to go and do it. So it shows up as do it yourself, which we are calling our group coaching. So what's exciting, the thing that I'm really excited about, hope that you're excited, see Brian and Doris, see Veronica's excited about this. We're launching the next cohort of our group coaching on February 23rd. So as I'm wrapping up this presentation, we're going to put a link in the chat to schedule a right fit call to see if you are right fit for this group coaching program or for either of the other packages I just showed you there, as we again focus on doing the executive DEI coaching, doing the organizational assessments and showing you how to do that on your own as well, and doing the DEI by design strategy sessions and the micro progression action classes, right? If you have learned some things about DEI in this presentation that you didn't know before, you can get the sense of how we operate and wanting to make sure that people get the information they need. So the packages, again, are the done for you, which is the highest level of support. The done with you is the next level of support, which we're coaching on how to do it in your organization. And then we have the do it yourself, where we teach you the tools and the strategies, and then you go and apply it into your organization. As I said before, the starting ranges are $10,000 a month for the full court press, where we go and do it all for you, then $5,000 a month where we are supporting you and rolling it out for your organization, and then the do-it-yourself or the group coaching model, where we are focused on helping you be a part of a cohort of other champions who are seeking to move this work forward, and that way you can roll it out in your organization on your own, at your own pace. And all of that, you can go, if you click the link in the chat here that Brian just put in the chat, it'll put you where you can schedule a right fit call. So 30-minute call, no obligation. This is if you want to find out what makes the most sense for your organization. This will allow us to talk about what your needs are, again, what your rate of change is, what your budget is, and being able to point you in the right direction and make sure, as we said, in the highest level of equity, make sure that you get what you need for your business to succeed and to thrive. So thank you for listening to the presentation. Now, I will close out the story. So he says, hey, before you go, let me ask you, I believe in fairness. I believe in giving people a fair shot. I believe in all these things we're talking about, but I'm struggling. And when I have two people, and they're both qualified, one who's white, one who might be black, a different skin color, how is it fair to prioritize the person who's not white? Isn't that another version of discrimination? Big question, right? So I said, first of all, thank you for asking. I know we just met, so I appreciate that you trust me. And I appreciate that you're trying to figure out how to make this more fair. So before I answer your question, I want to ask you, in the past, when you may have chose to hire, for example, this white person over any of the other minority groups, were you asking yourself the same kind of question? Kind of sat back in his chair. And it's like, if I'm being honest, no. So I'm like, okay, appreciate your honesty again. Thank you for that. What's interesting is, can you now then see how much bias is in your question, right? Where you're trying to compare this one group to another group, and before you weren't even considering how you might have been excluding the previous group. And it's interesting as we're having this conversation with this person, and we're talking through the idea of making our recruiting and hiring fair. Recruiting and hiring by nature is competitive. So there will always be people who do not get the opportunity to work with us. As we break this thing down for him and for everyone who's listening right now, it's important to, especially as you're trying to seek to diversify your pipeline, which is a word people keep throwing out. Why? Why are you doing it? Is this because someone's telling that you have to? Because that's going to create its own issues in itself. Or are you actually doing because you want to have career equity, have equity in your organization for more people, regardless, again, and in honor of their skin color? Those are very two different paths to take. So this person genuinely wanted to have a more diverse team because they want to be a part of this conversation. They want to actually support more people having the equity that they need to move forward and thrive in their lives. So I said, great. Let's make sure that's part of your strategic goals. Let's make sure that that type of logic is written out somewhere that is fair to look at and say, we are wanting to diversify our team. We're going to be doing these things as part of our strategic goals. That way, when it gets down to that decision, and I don't necessarily talk in hypotheticals because hypotheticals get us into a lot of trouble. When you have to make that decision, you pick fairly aligned with your strategic goals and everything else that you're working on. And fair doesn't necessarily mean we're going to make everyone happy, but at least that person know they had a fair shot at applying just like everybody else did. We weren't already excluding them before we give them a fair shot. Just know that equity is a conversation about fairness. If you understand how to make it fair for one group, we can continue to build off of that to make it fair for more and more people to join your organization and to thrive in your organization. And I appreciate that person again asking me, and they're one of those people who are going to join this group coaching program as well. And I say all of that not to impress you, but just to impress upon you, do you have a place to ask those kind of questions? A place where I'm not going to judge you, someone's not going to judge you, they're actually going to talk with you, help you kind of unpack what's in your mind and make a decision that supports all the people who are seeking to work in your organization. If you don't have this place, this is what we're offering to you. And regardless of which accelerator package you choose, we're here to support you. My team already put in the link for the right fit call. So now it's up to you to make that choice to join a call with me and we can talk through what option makes the most sense for you and your team. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I know that there's also, go for it, Sandra. So I got to go to bed. I'm in the UK. Yeah, I'm grateful that we have so many people from around the world here. So thank you all. Appreciate y'all. Thank you. We see some people already booked some calls. So thank you. I look forward to chatting with y'all soon. And for those who are still here, we're going to go right into the Q&A session. Go right into the Q&A session. So let's start with anybody who's on the panel. Yes, I thank y'all for those of you who are giving shout out in the chat there. Thank y'all. So there's a couple ways we can do Q&A. I know we have some panelists here. And with the panelists, you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Stacy says, thank you. Will we be able to share this video? Yes, you can absolutely share this video with your upper level team. So that's a great start to the Q&A. Great start to the Q&A. You can absolutely share this. We'll share out the recording as soon as possible. So once we're done, we will upload it and then send it over to you all. So let's see what other questions. I know that we I'm assuming that even the done for you option requires input and involvement by the folks in the organ. Absolutely. So when, yeah, so that's a great question. So when we're looking at integrating this into our team, when we are, depending on your level of support would also depend on your package, right? So the done for you is generally going to be people at the higher level who have a full support of their team, and the whole team would like to roll this out and perform at a high level, because that allows you to make the best use of that, and then we can put you on a rhythm that will serve your higher level folks as well as everybody else in your organization. So the done with you are going to be, again, folks who may be in that DEI committee where you've been tasked with doing this job. You might be the new head of HR, or there's one position called the chief of diversity and inclusion. That's like the most hired job last year. Some people are like, I'm the chief now. What do I do? Right. So if you're looking for that kind of support, you might be the person who's need it done with you, so we can guide you with that, and we can ask your questions about your organization specifically. And then the do it yourself might be if you're in that same kind of position. However, there's not as much budget or bandwidth in your organization to start applying the strategies. We want to be able to make sure that you have what you need. So again, you have the right strategies for the right solutions at the right time. So that way you're already poised and ready to take care of an issue when it shows up, right? The issues will show up, not if they show up. If you're scrambling, if you're constantly scrambling, we want to help you stop that scramble. So you can feel confident in approaching these issues and making sure that you're there to support your team. So thank you for that question. Could could you read the questions? So yeah, I was reading off some of the questions in the chat. Another question here, and so again, you can do the Q&A. So just next to where it says, where you have the chat option, you have an option for a Q&A. And then if you submit a Q&A there, we can actually see the Q&A, and then people can upvote it. Um, so it says, what learning resources should we connect with on basic DEI issues? I think I need some more clarity on that question. So are you, let's see, that would be, can we give, I want to say the name is, it's AMRYN. How do you say that? Let's go ahead and give you the ability to jump on the microphone, and let's see. It says allow to talk, so you should be able to pop on the microphone now. All right. Are you able?
Hi.
Hello.
I think you can hear me.
Yes. How do you say your name? I want to make sure I say your name correctly.
It looks really hard. It's just Amrin.
Amarin. Thank you so much, Amarin. I appreciate you. So can you elaborate on your question?
So I am just learning DEI, but I am looking to become one of the leadership in the movement here.
Mm-hmm.
And so my understanding is basic.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're waiting to start a program with you, are any resources that I should find and look at?
Great. So I think is, as you were saying, starting at the beginning. Well, one, we'll send you quite a bit of free trainings if you want, that we already did. Because if you like
Awesome.
our approach, and the reason I say that is because we haven't seen many people doing our approach. I mean, and we literally have DEI specialists pop into these trainings all the time, be like, man, I've been doing this for 30 years and I haven't seen anyone do it like that. It's like, great, thank you for that. Thank you for that, like, affirmation. But also it's kind of sad because then we see like other people are kind of taking a more shame and blame approach. So like I will tell you to proceed with caution. So we'll absolutely make sure that the team grabs your name and we can send you some of the other trainings that we did. And then from there, let's engage via email so that we can talk about what types of questions are you answering, because that's always I think we're in a world now, like these degrees I have are from the education, like from brain-based teaching and learning, and then from leadership. What's interesting is our brain learns by like, what questions are we trying to answer? So you can be overwhelmed by the information in the world, right? So the question I would be like asking you, what are the questions you're seeking to answer? And that would help us point you in the right direction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'll leave it at that for right now. And this is part of the reason we ask a lot of questions in our presentations. Because we were here to tell you, do exactly this. We could be causing you lots of trouble. Instead, we want to know what questions are you seeking to answer. And then that way we can go about pointing you in the right direction. So I appreciate you. I thank you for jumping on. So I'm going to put you back on mute. So Sharon says in the chat, Kimmy, will you speak at my conference? Absolutely. Sorry, Shannon. Shannon, go ahead. Brian's going to get in touch with you. So Brian can reach out to, to Shannon with absolutely love. And that's one of the options too, when you go into the right fit call, it'll say, do you want, to have a keynote? So have me come and speak to your organization. We're absolutely happy to do that. So thank you for that, Shannon. And then I see that Sarah says, let's see, da, 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 da. I'm just reading the question. All right, great. So not a question, but I appreciate the affirmation, Sarah. I was like, this is live, people. We're just going through it. So,
Hey, Kemi,
Brian, go for it.
Lewis has had his hand up for a little bit. I think he wants to ask a question as well.
Oh, so Lewis is raising a physical hand out
It's
there
a
because,
physical hand in
okay,
the
because there's a raise hand feature inside of Zoom. So I was looking for that. I'm sorry,
equitable
Lewis.
hand raising, dude.
I can't. It's all right, Lewis. Let's give equitable hand raising. My apologies. All right, so let me hold on. You're still muted. Let me ask you to unmute, and then what I'll do before you start
Great,
answering your question, let me spotlight you for folks. All right, go for it.
great. I have two. I have an answer rather than a question, and then I have a
Whoa.
compliment.
Okay, great.
The answer to your question about what do you do if all things are equal, who do you choose, has for 39 years that I've been doing this work been, if all else is equal, you want to choose the diversity, whatever it is, because the diversity is a gift that helps us achieve our common goal more fully than if we kept choosing similarities. So from it's that simple. And the best way I
It's
experienced
that
it,
simple.
it's that simple for me because the best way I experienced it was first 25 employees of my own company I started in 1982. I'll never forget the day when I looked around the room at our weekly meeting, and I went, wow, there are 25 of us, and I'm the only straight white male that I've hired. And then I realized, talk about diversity. Oh no, there's only one other, but he, if you will, was raised in poverty or whatever, and I was raised in privilege, and that difference alone, even though we look similar, was another diversity. So uh, all that diversity is what brought all of the differences that made gifts to achieve the common goal we had. So anyway, that's my answer. Okay,
Yeah.
and my compliment is not only that you're doing obviously and openly of free sessions, number one, that lead to leads for you. So it's great marketing. And secondly, you're not only giving wonderful content, that all of those are usually all anybody can do. But I want to compliment you because you somehow in your own life have not only used experience and intelligence and all the rest, but your spirit or soul, whatever you call it, is apparent every minute you are speaking to any of us. And for each of us to be able to do that is exactly what we're all trying to accomplish. And I just love seeing and feeling your spirit and energy in every word. Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis. I appreciate it. And we're also wearing the same, maybe we have a different one, but it seems like we have a similar one there. So I'll say thank you for that. And as you said, it's both that simple in terms of the recruiting question, but also that complicated, because then it is looking, and you gave another example too, that some people might have the same skin color, but based on where they were raised and how they were raised, there's that impact around that level of diversity. So what's interesting is diversity is both a gift. It's the greatest gift when we understand how to empower it, right? I'll say that because to just say putting a bunch of diverse people in the room, that's not always a gift because diversity can actually create more friction, right? Let's be real about that. So diversity is absolutely a gift, and what Lewis is sharing as we empower it, as we attract it, as we support it in our organization, and we truly and I love what you kind of said there, Lewis. Like in one version, you got yourself out of the way. So you look around, you're like, oh wow, look, here's this diverse group, and they're with me, I'm with them, and we're doing this together. And also, thank you for your appreciation. One of the things we also teach in any of our programs is how to be authentic in Zoom. I mean, this is the new way of doing it, and this has also been a greatest opportunity to practice diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know how many of y'all got on like in business to be like virtual virtual leaders. I don't really understand what this is anymore, but the idea that it's humbling. A lot of us had to start over, and we quickly started to see people who were being left out of conversations. we quickly started to experience what it's like to start over in something that we might have been really great at in person. And for those of you who experienced that feeling of maybe I'm going to be left behind, maybe I don't have the access, maybe I don't have the awareness. That's how a lot of people feel just in their day-to-day lives. So as you went through empowering yourself to get online, finding the resources, finding the technology, asking for help, think about what helps you feel empowered in that process. And how can you give that to other people who are looking to you to be their guide? I mean, back to what Lewis was saying, like I've been through tons and I'm grateful for the people who continue to support me and to trust me. So I want to make sure I can always provide support and trust whenever I get to be on camera or in person. So thank you for that reflection, as well as for your contribution to that conversation. So we have time for a couple more. People are giving me shout out there in the chat. Thank y'all for shouting out to Lewis there. Let's see what else we have going on here. Any other? So I'm looking at like all the people on the screen to make sure I'm not missing anybody else's hand. So see, we have a couple of panelists here. And then we also have some people who are there in the attendees area. So what are other questions that you would like answered right now? As Lewis said, like this is free, and this is also supporting our organization, but the biggest thing besides, I love going back to what we talk about, one of the areas is looking at how do we fund our organization, right? How do we actually drive sales and marketing? I was on a sales call with somebody yesterday, and we're partnering with a new survey platform and to make sure we can provide the most robust assessments and continue to evolve that. And the person I was talking to was so dang condescending to me. I was like, I recorded the conversation, shared it with my team. I'm like, did y'all hear this too? Am I the only one hearing this? And it's like, if your salespeople are being condescending to people who want to pay you money, like I'm just making sure we wrap our head around this, right? That we're in sales as well. We understand how to run a business. And as Lewis was talking about, this is for us value-based sales. We're going to be providing you value because we also are on this mission. We're purpose-driven leaders as well. We want to make sure that even if you just touch our ecosystem for a moment, you're going to be better for it. Become a client, fantastic. We'll help accelerate your journey. What's interesting is if you're not checking in on DEI with your sales team, you might be losing more customers than you realize. Same with your recruiting team. I mean, people can, in a time where people can rub you the wrong way, means a lot worse than it did before. I'm just telling you, make sure that you're checking in on all your processes. Sorry, that was a tangent because that happened to me yesterday. I'm like, oh. So no, my goal is my goal is, even in the pain and frustration I feel, to make sure it stops with me, that I don't have to pass it on. So I'll pass on my experience, but I don't have to pass on the pain or suffering in it. So, and Brian, I know we had some other questions from before, so we can pop those in, or if I see there's a couple of y'all here, you're welcome to raise your hand if you want to answer. So I can give y'all asked to be panelists. I see April and Carol, I see Pam, I see Sarah, I see Lola. So we can unmute one of you if you want to answer a question, or we will let the other folks pop it in. Go for it, Brian.
Yeah, so I had a question over here from Evan. If you are running a DEI committee right now, but you don't necessarily have influence in other areas of your organization that you really need to be able to influence, such as your sales department, for example, how do you go about gaining that influence in your organization?
Yeah, I appreciate that. What was the person's name again? Sorry. Evan. So thank you for asking, Evan. Like I said earlier, it's sad because it's like, again, some people are running DEI clubs, like, right? Like kind of like you do your pep squad, which is like something that you just have to know. The way you'll know is, do you actually have the E? Do you have the equity? Right? If your committee is just being included and saying, great, we have this committee, they're gonna be over here, they're gonna look great, we can put on a statement, oh wow, are we so good? If you don't have power, and that power generally comes from whoever put your committee together, from your leadership that gives you the approval, and then you're asking that kind of question, if we don't necessarily have influence, I will ask you as your committee to talk with your executive team and to get super clear on where do we have the power to influence change. Now notice I did not say make change, right? Because you might have to run that by them. And the idea is, where do we have the influence? Where do we have influence? And if they can't answer that question, make time on the schedule. Maybe you have to have a DEI by design session to actually work this out. Because if they cannot answer that question, if you cannot answer that question, then your committee might be more of a figurehead. It might be more of a checkbox versus something that can make a difference. And imagine you're asking that question because you do want to make a difference. So I'll say in the least threatening way to please check in with your leadership and have a, like, it might be a hard conversation to have. You're welcome to bring us in. We're happy to help to support that, because the other piece I'm going to just tack onto this is we also want to make sure that anybody who is volunteering to run or be a part of a DEI committee, that's also happening equitably. One of the saddest things I see is that you're a volunteer, but you still have to do your other job. So you're basically running a side hustle inside of the same company. I see people like, oh, that, are y'all talking about that April and Carol? Oh, crap, that's us, right? No, maybe that's not. Yeah. I just saw you look at each other like, oh man, it's us. But basically, you know, again, it's happening over and over. People running, they're basically running a committee, but that's not showing up on any of their metrics. Doesn't show up on their performance report. It's not necessarily calculated when it's like measuring people's time. So this becomes a thing where you're being asked to do more than you're getting paid for. And you might be doing it out of the goodness of your heart. However, we want to make sure that it's also being woven into your job description, to woven into the measures to make sure that it's actually a fair ask to you to be doing this. That way it can be sustainable. So that's a big answer to your question. Short version is to find out where you have influence as a community or as a DEI committee, and how to make being a member of that committee more equitable, especially in the allocation of your time and your resources. I see people nodding their heads. This is why we're doing a Q&A. And I also want to ask, you know, as we're doing this, kind of going back to what was said earlier, where I was seeing the process of wanting to help people and to also enroll folks into one of our accelerators. So if you're on the fence about that, I would encourage you to ask any questions that you have right now. Like, that would be whether you pop in the chat or you you know, jump on the microphone, because the goal would be to make sure it's actually a right fit for you. So even if you didn't schedule a call, if you're like, oh, I don't know yet, if you're still on here, we still have quite a bit of you on here. This is a great time to ask. You know, I can't get you. You can always fade to black if you want, right? So just know that this is like a great time to ask any questions related to that, or question, kind of burning questions that you have on your mind. So what else you got? If you're trying to unmute, you have to either raise your physical hand or pop in the chat so I can unmute you. We did that for our protection to make sure people can't just unmute at any time. It looks like Brian had another question. What do you got, Brian?
Hold on. April and Carol have raised.
Okay, perfect. All right, April, let's go for it. So it says ask to unmute. So you should now have the ability to unmute. And as you're doing this, I will also add you to the spotlight. All right, what do you have? Yeah, now you're
I don't have a question. This is the second one of your sessions that I've attended. I love them. But this is a comment. You said something just a couple of minutes ago, and I thought, you know, that might be one of the most valuable things I've heard in a while about the times that we're living in. You said, make sure it stops with me. I don't have to pass it on. And when I think about all of the things that all of us experience on a daily basis that have to do with everything that we're living through in 2020 and now being carried over into 2021, if I could remember that every single day, every time somebody says or does something, and it can be in the media, it doesn't have to be in my own personal life, since April and I hardly ever go anywhere anyway, how much more smoothly my days would go. And I want to thank you for saying that. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Carol. Yeah, that it's a long time ago I committed to breaking cycles of negativity and violence, and that's just been my personal mission. Like, this is an what's the word I'm looking for? This is a extension of that. But for me, it's always been that same mission, because then I know that although I have done harm in the past, I can reduce the harm that I do, and I can also stop myself from like traumatizing or hurting other people. And I think this is also valid to share, and especially in the DEI space, that so many of us have been wounded. And just because we have been wronged doesn't mean that we are now right or have the right to then hurt other people. And that's our philosophy. Not everybody shares that. So it's going back to when the person asks about, hey, what do I educate? I'm like, be careful where you educate yourself, because some folks are they're still hurt, and they're passing on more hurt than they are helping. So thank you for that affirmation, Carol, because that's the goal for us, is to make sure that we help more people. All right, we got time for one last question.
Yeah, so Dre wants to know what is it? What are the experiences like inside the group coaching program? Could you speak more about the kinds of training sessions? Are they similar to this one, or how are they different? And then what sorts of skills will we get to learn to put in practice?
Dre, I'm going to tell you, get in that group. So real quick, I'll share. We'll send an email about this too. That we will actually have a demo, a group coaching demo on Tuesday. Brian's at 12 p.m. EST. You're muted again.
Hold on, just double checking right
Yeah.
now. We're
So-
looking at Tuesday the 9th at noon, 12 p.m. EST.
So that will be a great place to come, Dre, to be able to. It was Dre, right? I'm like listening so much to the question, I forget the person's name, so that's why I keep asking. But so one, I'll tell you that we're gonna have that as a longer form session, so that way you can also actually have even deeper questions if you want to ask. But the short version is that it's like this on a regular basis. Instead of it being a webinar, that would be the group room, so we actually can have collaboration. So we'll break it down. We'll do a little bit of teaching. So the sessions are 90 minutes. So we'll do about 45 minutes of teaching, and then we'll have some time for workshopping, because we want you to actually leave with strategy. So for example, today we gave you a lot of questions to ask, to think through as you're preparing your assessments and you're looking at your strategy. We actually would want to workshop some of that. So as you leave the session, you're able to hit the ground running and actually apply something that same week. And then we always close out with some Q&A to make sure that people answer their burning questions. And we are doing this in a cohort model. We very much believe in brave spaces, right? We talk a lot about helping people feel safely and thrive. We also know that safety is a basis for bravery and people stepping up and asking hard questions and doing the work that we need to do to move forward. So we do a cohort model to make sure that you start with the same group throughout the year, and that way you get to know each other, that you can trust each other, you can actually ask each other some of those hard questions and be able to bounce off ideas. So it's more of a collective care type model to make sure that people get what they need. So I think that answered it in a couple different ways. And I would say to, like I said, the demo is at Tuesday the 9th at 12 p.m. and that 12 p.m. Eastern. I know we have people from all over the world, 12 p.m. EST. To make sure that if you have any further questions, if you're on the fence, you can just jump in there, and we're happy to demo what we would be doing, show you some of the content, and that way you get a clear idea of what you get out of your investment of $1,000 a month. So I would tell you to come there. So thank you for that question, Dre. And on that note, we will end out the session. It's been an honor to be with y'all here as we close out this session on advancing racial equity with DEI, and really focusing on how we can be fair and forward thinking, right? We're in such an intense time where skin color has been stigmatized. And I want to be able to make that conversation more approachable so people can talk about it, so we can move beyond the stigma of skin color and really serve people who may be of a different skin color, but also might have other things going on and are representing other diverse groups and all these intersections. We can make it approachable to support them, right? We can make it actionable to support them. And in the business world, we can also make it profitable to support them. That's what we're here to do. And I thank y'all for giving an opportunity to share this information with y'all today. Look forward to seeing y'all soon.